Very good afternoon to everyone present here. I, Khyati Tongi, am a third year law student. First of all, I would like to thank Amit sir, who is the founder, CEO, and editor-in-chief of Fast Forward Justice, for giving me this opportunity. Telling you something more about Fast Forward Justice, I would like to say that it is an online organization which has always aimed at presenting law in its simplest form as to make law accessible even for a layman to understand. It conceptualizes the efforts of law students at all levels and believes in working together for bringing a development in the present legal education system. To achieve this vision, various seminars, workshops, competitions, and moot courts are organized with a focus on drafting and researching skills. The Fast Forward Journal is currently inviting submissions for its sixth issue, and in the end, providing opportunities for development of stakeholders of this field is the mission. To achieve this mission, today's webinar on law on maintenance under matrimonial law is organized, and our speaker for today is Advocate Mrunmayee Chatterjee, ma'am. Giving a brief about a ma'am, I would like to say that she is a practicing advocate at New Delhi with about 6 years of experience. Her practice areas include civil and commercial litigation, including family law, real estate law, constitutional law, alternate dispute resolution, service and consumer law. So it is a privilege to have you today with us, ma'am, here today as a speaker. And now I would like to hand over discussion to a ma'am, and also I would like to welcome all the participants and request them to switch on their cameras. And also that if they have any doubts, they can ask in the chat box here. We'll have last 10 minutes for doubt resolutions. So to throw more light on the subject of matrimonial laws and maintenance, I would like to hand over discussion to our guest. Ma'am, it is over to you now.
Okay. Thank you so much for inviting me again to speak on this topic. Maintenance under matrimonial laws is one of the most relevant aspects of matrimonial laws because it can make or break a litigation. It can lead to a settlement. It is the key point, key turning point in any matrimonial litigation. And several case laws, and there is a lot of jurisprudence which has developed over the years on the laws of maintenance as well. So firstly, I would like to speak about what are the types of maintenance which you can get. Basically, here we will be discussing various Indian laws which are there under which maintenance provisions for women and children are provided. So I will be focusing on maintenance of wife specifically. So these are provided under the Hindu Marriage Act, Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act, the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act 2005, Section 125, and there are some paramateria provisions under the Special Marriage Act also. So if we speak about the types of maintenance which can be sought are, basically there is ad interim maintenance. So ad interim is when you have filed some kind of legal proceedings related to divorce or maintenance. So before those, that litigation can be determined based on the facts, based on the income of the parties, based on other relevant factors which are crucial to the case. If the wife who has sought maintenance, if the wife or any of the parties who have sought maintenance are in extreme destitution, or are extremely unable to maintain themselves, they do not have any support system, any maintenance of their own, court can, based on the situation, also grant ad interim maintenance, which is prior to the decision of the interim maintenance. Thereafter, we have interim maintenance or the maintenance pendent light. So this basically means, like, while the main proceedings are pending, the court can determine an amount of monthly maintenance which the party has to pay to another party, to the applicant. And maintenance pendent light basically translates into maintenance during the pendency of proceedings. Thereafter, the court also has power that first and foremost, when the petition is filed, when an application for maintenance is filed, so that the wife, it is usually the wife, the applicant can afford litigation proceedings. So the court can amount a lump sum amount to the wife so that she can afford to litigate. Thereafter, there are provisions related to permanent alimony. Permanent maintenance or permanent alimony comes into picture after you obtain a decree of divorce. Thereafter, there are maintenance orders related to children. There are several provisions related to maintenance of children, which include maintenance related to their education, their welfare, their overall upkeep. And thereafter, there can be certain miscellaneous maintenance orders and reliefs also. For example, if wife is living separately, to provide for her residence, to provide compensation, to provide for her medical bills, or any ancillary maintenance matters come under these kind of orders. So now let's begin by the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act 2005 and what all maintenance provision does it provide. So basically, the who can file a domestic violence complaint is contained in the definition under Section 2, subclause A, which defines an aggrieved person, which is basically any woman who is or has been in a domestic relationship with the respondent and who alleges to have been subjected to any kind of domestic violence by the respondent. Here, children can also seek maintenance. The wife can also seek maintenance for the children. Child is defined as any person below the age of 18 years and also includes adopted, step, or foster child. Thereafter, domestic relationship, which is included in the definition of aggrieved person, is also further determined under subclause F as relationship between two persons who live or have at any point of time lived together in a shared household when they are related by consanguinity, marriage, or through a relationship in nature of marriage, adoption, or are family members living together as joint family. So basically, domestic relationship has now, through the jurisprudence developed through decisions of the Honorable Supreme Court and several other high courts, have also sought to include live-in relationships under domestic relationship. Moreover, another point to see here is that shared household holds a very important aspect in any domestic violence complaint, because this I will cover under a personal case study of mine, where in a matter, what happens nowadays is we blindly make all the parties, all the relatives a party, but the important factor is that they can be discharged from the complaint if you cannot prove that you were living together in a shared household. So it has to be a joint house setup. It has to be that you have at any point of time lived with your father-in-law, mother-in-law, brother-in-law, or other members other than your husband if you want to make them a party. So that is where the shared household concept gains prominence. Thereafter, respondent is defined as any adult male person who is or has been in a domestic relationship with the aggrieved person and against whom the aggrieved person has sought any relief under this act. So here, subsequently, through case laws, it has the adult male person has been struck off, and now a female relative of the husband also can be made a respondent. So a mother-in-law or a sister-in-law or any other female relative can also be made a party. Now, what constitutes domestic violence is contained in section 3, which says that any act, omission, commission, or conduct of the respondent. So basically, the definition of section 3 of domestic violence is extremely wide. It has a very wide scope, and it includes all kinds of emotional, physical, sexual, verbal, or economic abuse or mental abuse which you can perceive. So I will not be reading the exact definitions which is contained here. That primarily it includes all kinds of emotional, physical, sexual, verbal, and emotional abuse. And also it also includes all the offenses which we also see under 498A, which are related to the demand of dowry. Any kinds of threats or injuries or harm, physical or mental, to the aggrieved person are all covered. So here another point to note is that under the explanation in section 3, the definition of physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal and emotional abuse, and economic abuse are explained in detail. So again, like I said, the scope of domestic violence is extremely wide. Now, what are the reliefs which can be sought under Domestic Violence Act are? First of all, the relief of right to residence in a shared household is contained under Section 17. So Section 17 basically says that every woman in a domestic relationship shall have the right to reside in the shared household, whether or not she has any right, title, or beneficial interest in the in that property particularly, and she cannot be evicted or excluded from the shared household or any part of it by the respondent other than in accordance with law. So basically, this Section 17 is one of the major highlights of Domestic Violence Act, through which you can seek orders against eviction from the property, because when this act was brought about, it was brought about with the view that women are extreme violence is committed against women. They're thrown out of their matrimonial homes. They have nowhere to go. So this section basically protects that right. Thereafter, Section 18 contains protection orders. So the procedure under Domestic Violence Act is that under Section 12, once you make a complaint to a magistrate, he has to appoint a protection officer to that particular applicant, and that particular applicant will go to the protection officer will meet the victim and make a domestic incident report, and that report has to be submitted to the magistrate, based on which the cognizance will be taken. So under Section 18, protection orders can be passed that the respondents will not commit any acts of domestic violence. They will not aid or abet in commission of acts of domestic violence. They will not enter her place of employment of the aggrieved person. If person is a child, they will not go to their school, or not go to any other place frequented by the aggrieved person. They will not even attempt to communicate in any form whatsoever with the aggrieved person, including personal, oral, or written communication. Moreover, at the time of alienating of assets or bank lockers or any other properties which are jointly owned by the applicant and the other respondents, then they will not be allowed to alienate all these assets. Thereafter, causing violence to the dependents of the applicant. These are also sought to be protected under Section 18. Thereafter, we have Section 19. Section 19 covers the residence orders. So, Section 17 is the explanation, is in a form of an explanation of the Section 19 residence orders. So, basically, while disposing of an application, the magistrate may, after they have been satisfied that there is it is a case of domestic violence and cognizance has been taken, they may restrain the respondent from dispossessing the aggrieved person from the shared household. Again, this relief arrives from Section 17. Thereafter, the magistrate may direct the respondent to remove himself from the shared household. If he is a threat to the applicant, then the magistrate may order that the respondent should remove himself. Thereafter, the magistrate may direct to restrain the respondent or any of his relatives from entering the portion which has been ascribed to the applicant in the shared household. Again, alienating and dispossessing of shared household or any of his properties. In some cases, it happens that to get rid of the applicant, the parties might want to might want to get rid of the property itself. So that is also restrained under this section. Thereafter, the restrain the respondent from renouncing his rights in shared household except with the leave of magistrate, and thereafter directing the respondent to secure same level of alternate accommodation. So basically, all possible conclusions you can imagine to a residence, to basically rights related to the residence of the applicant are protected under Section 19, primarily being that there will be no alienation of assets where she is residing. Thereafter, her interest in that shared household will be protected in the form that no other respondent from whom she is apprehending a threat will be allowed to come to her portion, and a particular portion can be ascribed to the applicant. And thereafter, uh, if at all the circumstances are such that the applicant cannot in under any circumstances stay in the shared household, then the respondents will have to secure an alternate accommodation to her. Then section 20 covers the monetary reliefs. So basically the monetary reliefs are again very interesting, that the magistrate may direct the respondent to pay monetary relief to meet the expenses incurred and losses suffered by the aggrieved person and any child of the aggrieved person as a result of domestic violence, which may include but are not limited to the loss of earnings, medical expenses, loss caused due to destruction, damage, or removal of property from the control of the aggrieved person, and the maintenance for the grieved person as well as her children. And these are all in addition of any other relief which she may obtain from any other legal proceedings. So basically, monetary reliefs cover all your interim maintenance orders, all your orders related to any loss of earnings which the woman might have claimed, any damages which the women might have claimed to her property, to her career prospects, everything is covered under monetary reliefs. Then there are custody orders under section 21. So we don't need to go into the details of custody order, but under section 21, you can also ask for temporary custody of the child of the aggrieved person. Then section 22 covers the compensation orders. So this is in addition to the monetary reliefs that the magistrate may pass an order directing the respondent to pay compensation and damages for injuries, both mental torture and emotional distress caused by the acts of domestic violence. So it is self-explanatory then that for all the trouble which the aggrieved person has endured throughout this time, for that a lump sum compensation can be ordered. Now, section 23 covers the interim and ex parte orders. So, section 23 is very important because while all these section 18, 19, 20 and 21, 22 are determined by the court. So, during pendency of these proceedings, under section 23, interim maintenance can be awarded to the aggrieved person, and the magistrate also has power that in extreme cases where the aggrieved person is in extreme destitution, cannot support herself, then ex parte order in form of ad interim maintenance can also be passed. Then there are other relevant provisions which you will find in all other maintenance provisions as well, are alteration of orders. For example, there is any change in circumstances that you might realize that the basis on which the interim maintenance was granted, now those situations have changed. The respondent has started earning much more, or they have acquired new properties. There is, or your situation has worsened or changed accordingly, so you can seek alteration of orders. So all your enhancement and also decrease of maintenance are all covered under this. Thereafter, section 27 is another important section which covers what is the jurisdiction, that where will you need to file the complaint. So there are 3 points in it, that where the person aggrieved permanently or temporarily resides or carries on business or is employed. Thereafter, where the respondent resides or carries on business or is employed, and where the cause of action has arisen. So, primarily, Domestic Violence Act is a welfare legislation, and it's for the benefit of the aggrieved persons and women who have faced domestic violence. So, it does not put a bar on you. It again, the jurisdiction has a very wide scope, that wherever you are residing, even temporarily, you can file a complaint from there. You can file a complaint from your permanent address as well, and you can file a complaint where all these incidents have arisen. You can also file a complaint in the jurisdiction where the respondents are residing. Therefore, thereafter, section 29 covers the provision for appeal. Again, another important section in DV Act is which gives a lot of power to the magistrate to determine their own procedure, is section 28. So it says that other than CRPC and the provisions prescribed in the DV Act, the magistrate has power to lay down its own procedure. Now, after we have covered the Domestic Violence Act, comes the section 125 of Code of Criminal Procedure. So the order of we must also all have read section 125 in law schools. It covers basically orders for maintenance of wives, children or parents. So any a wife who is unable to maintain herself, uh, or it also covers legitimate or illegitimate minor children, whether married or not, unable to maintain itself, or there are further description of legitimate or illegitimate children not being a married daughter who have attained majority, where they are incapacitated by reason of physical or mental abnormality or injury, and therefore they are unable to maintain themselves. And it also covers father or mother unable to maintain himself or herself. So here under section 125, if you see in Domestic Violence Act, the focus was that you have to establish that you have faced domestic violence, then you have to establish that there is a domestic relationship with the respondents, uh, and thereafter your the cognizance will be taken on your case. So here under 125, the formula, if we can say, is simple, that if you're unable to maintain yourself, and if you're a wife, and it also covers divorced wife, separated wives, uh, and a legally married wife, so all of them are covered under section 125. So 125 basically is a little bit shorter in approach, but it is quicker. The reliefs which are contained under section 125 CRPC are that it is basically 125 gives you a monthly maintenance. It orders a monthly maintenance against the husband, where it can also, if in situation the court can see that the woman is unable to maintain herself, so then interim monthly maintenance while the main proceedings are finalized, and interim monthly maintenance can also be decided. Moreover, under 125 also, the court has power to determine litigation expenses. Litigation expenses are, again, as I described, is a lump sum amount given to the applicant so that she can proceed with the litigation. So here the defining criteria is the proof of neglect or refusal, because if you look at the language of the section 125, so it contains the language contains proof of that the husband has neglected or refused to maintain the wife. So here we have to prove that there has been neglect or refusal to maintain. Uh, Another important feature is that the maintenance can be cancelled or can be rejected if wife is living in adultery, or living separately by mutual consent, or living separately without any plausible reason. Now, another very important and popular maintenance provision is under the Hindu Marriage Act 1955. So, section 24, 25, and 26 are extremely important. So, 24 contains interim maintenance. So, first of all, that the section 24 cannot be filed in isolation. So, if you have filed any kind of proceedings under the Hindu Marriage Act, be it of restitution of conjugal rights, judicial separation, or divorce, so along with those proceedings, you can file section 24 proceedings also, uh, where either the wife or the husband. So under Hindu Marriage Act, both the wife and husband have the right to seek maintenance, if the case be if they have no independent income sufficient for his or her support and the necessary expenses of the proceeding. So the court may order the respondent to pay the petitioner expenses of the proceeding, uh, and they have to take into consideration the petitioner's income and the income of the respondent. So here again, under interim maintenance, maintenance pendent light is also included. Under section 25, which is permanent maintenance or permanent alimony, so it can be obtained at the time of passing of a divorce decree, or subsequently after you have obtained a divorce. So on an application made again either by the husband or the wife, that the respondent has to pay to the applicant a gross sum, or basically a lump sum amount, which can be fixed at a monthly or a periodical manner, but not exceeding the life of the applicant. And again, the criteria is same, that the income and assets of the respondent and the applicant have to be taken into account. Thereafter, section 26 covers the custody of children. So here, not only the custody is covered, but also orders related to maintenance, education, welfare of the children are all included under section 26. So if you are an applicant who's a wife with children, then you have to file applications under section 24 as well as 26 in a proceeding under the Hindu Marriage Act. So now another provision is the section 18 and 19 of the Hindu Adoptions and Maintenance Act. So this is more or less pari-materia to the provisions of Hindu Marriage Act, but the difference is that here a husband is not included. They are not entitled to seek maintenance under the Hindu Adoptions and Maintenance Act. So section 18 is basically a Hindu wife is entitled to claim maintenance from her husband while living separately from her husband in the following circumstances. So there are certain circumstances mentioned, which are basically desertion, or there is willful neglect, or there is cruelty, or there is it was harmful or injurious for her to live with the husband. There leprosy, the husband had another wife living. So all these there are provisions prescribed under section 18, and in which conditions the Hindu wife can be entitled to claim maintenance. Moreover, again, under all Hindu laws, if the wife is unchaste and living without any plausible reason, then she is not entitled to maintenance. Then section 19 of the Hindu Adoptions and Maintenance Act covers maintenance of widowed daughter-in-law. That if your husband is no more, then you have the right to seek maintenance from the father-in-law, which he will be providing from the estate of the husband. So all of this is covered under the Hindu Adoptions and Maintenance Act. Then similarly under Special Marriage Act, there are section 36 and 37, which is pari-materia to the provisions of Hindu Marriage Act, where alimony pendant light and permanent alimony are covered. So here, as under Special Marriage Act, it is for any marriage which any registered Indian marriage between two Indian people. The religion, all religions are included. So those are included under the Special Marriage Act can claim maintenance through section 36 and section 37. So now I would like to speak about what are the principles which are crucial in determining maintenance. So now recently in Kusum Sharma versus Mahendra Sharma, in an order dated 6th August 2020, which is very, very fresh. So it has been determined that maintenance is not only a legal right, but it is also a basic human right. So earlier also, I believe anybody who is practicing in Delhi must know that in all kinds of matrimonial matters, all the provisions which I have covered herein, you have to mandatorily file an affidavit of income, expenditure, assets, and liabilities as laid down under Kusum Sharma versus Mahendra Sharma. So, going matter where through help of amicus, Justice J.R. Mida has determined a very detailed affidavit so that the parties cannot escape scrutiny of the court, so as to which the court will undertake to decide what is their status, what is their income, what are their expenditures, what are their assets and liabilities, because otherwise it becomes extremely difficult if the entire burden of proof is put on either of the parties to prove the income of of another party. So it is not possible for parties to do so. So the responsibility is of the court to ascertain all these questions. So these I would like to after covering all these points, I would like to share the comprehensive affidavit which we need to file. So these are also now being adopted in Rajasthan, in Madhya Pradesh, in Bombay High Court as well. So in several judgments, the emphasis is laid on Kusum Sharma versus Mahendra Sharma that the court should ask the parties to file an affidavit of income and assets. So thereafter, there are several principles, several basic principles which have been determined in number of cases that the wife cannot be denied maintenance even if she has a source of income or is qualified. So this was recently determined in Sanjay Damodar Kale versus Kalyani Sanjay Kale. In fact, in one of the cases which we argued in Supreme Court, so the income of the wife was set at in a domestic violence petition, it was set at 9,000 rupees for her and her child, which was extremely less compared to the income of the husband. So their main argument was that the wife is a PhD and is extremely qualified and is getting a grant and is extremely qualified to take care of herself and her child. So cannot ask for enhancement of maintenance. So Supreme Court held that even if the wife is qualified or educated, it does not deny her the right to maintenance, right to enhanced maintenance, and it depends on the status of the husband basically. So the income was the maintenance was enhanced to rupees 25,000 in that case. So another principle is that again merely because the wife is capable of earning, it is not a ground to deny maintenance. It was recently held by Delhi High Court. Then again, husband is duty bound to maintain wife as per his status. So here we are seeing that the status of the husband, the income of the husband are the determining factors in deciding the quantum of maintenance, and the qualification and the income earned by wife are somewhere relevant, but then they cannot be the sole determining criteria. Now practically speaking, what I have seen in my own experience, I believe that since matrimonial litigation is an extremely subjective litigation, for example, in domestic violence, you are before a magistrate under section 125, you are before a district judge because you are in a family court, so your matter is being heard by a district judge. Thereafter, when you go in appeal, you go to a double bench of a high court straight away. So, and in an appeal in a domestic violence proceeding, you go to a single bench of high court. So there is no set criteria which you will be meeting, and it is an extremely subjective matter. Although there are number of case laws to help you on each and every aspect, but the main criteria being that a wife has to be maintained as per the status and the income of the husband. So other than that, all these extraneous circumstances that the wife is earning, or if she is earning too much or too less, so all those do count uh, if you are a husband, and it comes in handy from the side of the dependent. But eventually what the judges see is that based on the income affidavit, they see what is the income tax return of both the parties and they decide on the basis of that. Now concluding, I would say what are the very important points in any kind of matrimonial litigation where you are seeking maintenance is: first is drafting, because I have seen a number of cases where uh, we follow a format drafting because usually the practice which I have seen is, which is very incorrect, is people file a multitude of cases. You will file section 24 also, you will file a divorce proceeding also. Within that, the applicant will seek maintenance under section 24. Then you will also file a section 12 of domestic violence act. Then you will also file a section 125. So all these are to put pressure on the respondents to settle the matter eventually, or to gain a very high quantum of maintenance. But actually it does not work like that. I will tell you, for example, in one of my matters, uh, we were rebuked. My client was rebuked in Supreme Court because the husband said that why should I pay her higher maintenance, because she has at one hand she wanted to seek maintenance from me, on the other hand I was sent to jail under section 498A. So this is what happens when you do not have a clear cut strategy, you do not know your agenda, that what do you actually want from your litigation, and you blindly go to a lawyer, and based on misconceived advice you file all kinds of cases. So in cases where your primary goal is to seek maintenance, where you have children, and maintenance is of very crucial, it's very crucial for you, you cannot go on filing criminal cases against your husband and expect that you will get a good maintenance amount, because naturally it's logic that you want him to be working for him to give you some amount of money. So first of all, before delving into any kind of litigation, it is very important to be collected, to collect all the material which you have, to make a list of dates for you to go to for you to go to your lawyer, or for lawyers to ask the clients that they provide them with a list of dates and list of events which has happened, and not blindly do whatever the client is saying, or blindly follow whatever the lawyer is also saying. Then again, mediation is an extremely important tool, and uh, my practical experience nowadays, 75 to 80% of the cases settle at the before trial at the stage of mediation, because under all these provisions which I just mentioned, the court has power to send you for a mediation even before the even before the trial has started, after the ad interim or interim maintenance is determined. So the court has power, if they have a if they have this within the facts and circumstances of the case, if they feel that the matter can be settled, they mandatorily have to refer you to mediation, and mediation should be taken very seriously. And the kind of vendetta litigation which I have mentioned in the last point, it should be avoided. Here I'll also like to give a very interesting example, that in one of the cases uh, which I had handled once, the brief had come through, had passed through already three to four lawyers, and I was the fifth lawyer. So in that case, a domestic violence matter was filed, uh, for again for no reason, because she had also filed divorce proceedings, she had also filed 125, she had also filed 498A without any reason. So under the domestic violence proceeding, what the father-in-law and mother-in-law did, that they went in under 482 and got themselves discharged from the domestic violence proceeding, on the basis that they were not living with their daughter-in-law in a shared household, and their son had in fact a separate house of his own, and at any point of time within their married life, within their life, they did not reside together. So on this basis, they got a discharge order, and later on the father-in-law filed a suit for defamation against my client, which was again like added to which again added to the list of 14 15 cases which were already going on. So this is how, if you have a negative agenda, if you do not have a clear cut strategy, so this is how it comes back to bite you. So these are and again, the third point which I have not discussed is, you have to be extremely proactive, because in maintenance matters, practically what happens is that respondents are also very clever. If they can somehow they are successful in stalling the proceedings for a very long time, what happens is that they alienate all these assets. If you have do not have a clear strategy, and if you have not received good orders, or you're involved in multiple litigations, so what happens is you lose track of what is important, and meanwhile the respondents will get away with a lot of things. They might alienate their assets, they might alienate their properties in the name of their female members of their family. So and after few years in the litigation, after 5 years 6 years in the litigation, then there is no turning back, and it becomes a very protracted, very sore form of litigation for you, which benefits nobody. So I would like to now take questions.
Yes, ma'am, that was really insightful. We have got one question. The question is from Nitika Mahajan. The question is whether wife whose marriage is void can file an application for maintenance under Section 125 CRPC or not, whose marriage is void.
Whose marriage is void, in my opinion you cannot, but then again I will have to look up a case law on this, because it is a matter of it's a very factual matter. So I'll have to look up a case law on this, but in my opinion, a wife whose marriage is void, declared void, cannot claim maintenance.
Right, ma'am. There are no more questions, but I personally have a question. So,
Yeah.
what happens when there are maintenance laws, personal laws, and then there is a secular act like IPC and CRP, like CRPC. So, which one gets an upper hand, or can we claim under both the acts?
See, in Shah Bano case, it was held that the personal laws, basically Section 125 is a major example under which Muslim women can also claim maintenance. So it is a welfare litigation legislation, and if personal laws and customary laws cannot gain precedence over 125, which is a welfare legislation and includes aggrieved persons from all religions.
Okay, yes. So if there is anyone who wants to ask anything, they may raise hand and we can also unmute you if you want to even have any discussion like with ma'am or anything. Ma'am, so what topic or that is a must read for every student or every citizen or every law student in your opinion?
Come again, can you ask the question again?
What are some of the books or any article or anything that you may suggest for the law student or any citizen to read in this subject or in this matter?
I would recommend, there is a wonderful book with by very senior advocate Malvika Rajkotia on divorce. So it is called Intimacy Undone. So I'm also in middle of reading it, and it is based on her experience through matrimonial litigation in Delhi all through these years. And thereafter, I again recommend that if you're practicing in Delhi, then you should read Kushum Sharma versus Mahendra Sharma, because you need to be well versed with the affidavit of expenditure and everything. And again, the drafting of any matrimonial litigation is not tough, but of course, maintaining the sequence of events and to know a strategy, where you are aiming, what is your aim, if there are children involved, so all that needs to be learned with experience.
Yes, ma'am, I'll definitely read that. And we have got a question. How about the maintenance for an illegitimate child?
I believe maintenance for an illegitimate child is covered under section 125. So if I'm not wrong, so I have covered it under 125. Let me see. Yeah, so it has to be an illegitimate minor child, whether married or not, unable to maintain itself. So it is covered under 125.
Right, ma'am. And the other question is, how about the maintenance for a child when the parents after divorce get married to different person in different religion?
Okay. So basically, for maintenance of a child who are now married, so after remarriage, you cannot claim under, I think you cannot claim under section 125 as well. So for maintenance of a child, you can go under Hindu Adoptions and Maintenance Act. Then there is Guardians and Wards Act 1890, which is specifically for children and their custody. So all of this can be covered under Guardians and Wards Act.
Right. So that is a very interactive session and very insightful discussion. I think that is it. And we'll share your email ID. If anyone is interested, they may contact you directly and ask it out. So that's it. Thank you
Okay.
so much. And I'll also like to thank all the participants for coming in and making this webinar a successful one. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you. See you. Bye.
Bye, ma'am.